Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. We're going to give everyone just a moment to join, so if you'll hang. Our speakers today are Michael Mills, Technical Sales Manager, and Jason Friedman, Implementation Manager. All right, you're here for Ready to Consolidate. Here are the Fluke reliability tips to multi-site standardization. Jason, Michael, take it away.
Thank you very much, Robin. As you mentioned, again, today is all about organizations that are consolidating or standardizing on a single maintenance platform, and some of the tips and tricks that we've kind of collected over the years. I won't step into exactly all of Jason's intro here, but being part of implementation, he's run through a number of these different change management processes, and what we want to do is really provide value to organizations that are thinking about standardizing. Right? What are some of the common pitfalls that they may run into along the way? So just to kind of meet who we are, to kick it off, I'm Michael Mills. I'm the technical sales manager here with the eMaint team, and I've been working with the organization for about 11 years at this point. The angle that I take, the approach I take to this type of webinar is, I do spend a lot of time speaking with our customers, a lot of time on the road, just trying to hear what some of these challenges are with organizations, because it's not an easy process. A lot of times it is like herding cats, saying, "Hey, we want to see these benefits, and what we're going to do, and how are we going to get there." It seems to be a struggle. So from my side of it is, I want to help organizations make that change and deliver from there. Jason, I'll let you intro yourself here.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Jason Friedman, manager of the implementation team here at Fluke Reliability, focusing on the eMaint product. I've been with the company over 7 years now, and really working with Mike and his team. We've seen customers that come in that are truly looking to drive better ROI and efficiencies throughout their organization. And between myself and my team, we see some of the things that people fall into where they're attempting to get into that standardized CMMS. They're really trying to roll out globally to get the best ROI on their investment into a CMMS and get that broad visibility. But there tend to be some things that cause issues in the rollout process or the decision-making process, data gathering, et cetera. So me and my team have been seeing this from the execution side, and again, working alongside Mike here, really just looking to provide that information to customers so that they can better prepare to execute in the best way possible.
Thanks, Jason. So just to plug our own webinar that we're on here, over the next 45-ish minutes, we're going to talk about, again, some of the common areas that are blind spots for organizations or maybe difficult to navigate, but again, the end goal being a standardized system. So the agenda for today is we're going to talk about standardization, some of the milestones along the way, but we're going to focus heavily around the data and what the data should look like when you're making this transition, especially if you're working in, again, a global organization. Now, what I want to talk about for a second is, standardization is not new, but it does take a lot of time for organizations to build momentum to get there. Now, we've all heard that there are some very large benefits to be had or to be realized when it comes to standardizing on a single maintenance platform, EAM, CMMS, these types of tools along the way. Now, what feels like some of the largest push started in the early 2000s when there was the original global asset management framework came out, BAS, I think it was 55, where it started to show that if you standardize, there's incremental moves that can be made along the way to improve your organization. In the early 2000s, there was a large push for these digital transformations, again, cloud-based softwares and systems that again could then be leveraged across the globe. And then I believe it was around mid-2000s, ISO 55000 was put into place. I think it was 2014, 2015, which really emphasized, again, a global asset management standardization for different organizations. So this isn't new, but it is something that's continuously evolving for organizations that are trying to remain competitive. Now, there are benefits, right? There's actually, I'll reference Greg Perry. He's one of our professional services team members who preaches this on a daily basis. But in a conversation with him a number of years ago, he was talking about standardization being you're trying to get everyone, every organization, every site onto a level playing field or onto a level area for benchmarking purposes. There are sites that will be more mature. There are sites that will be less mature, some that are using all different systems. And what you want to do is be able to create a standard process where you can compare them apples to apples, level playing field in order to make incremental improvements across the board. And so you do that in a few different ways. You improve benchmarking, you reduce siloed data, everything appears into one place. And overall, you can make strategic moves for your organization, right? It's a little easier when all the data is one place than having to have those meetings, those conversations where everything gets spun in just a slightly different way. But the actual value, the actual benefits of this type of process can be anywhere from 30% lower maintenance costs, 28% increase in uptime for your assets, 80% PM compliance, right? So the ability to start to train across different sites and making sure that organizations are operating correctly, or a big one being a 30% lower MRO spare parts inventory that's being held within organizations through cross references, common parts, shared tables, and so on. So these are just some of the areas in which organizations can see improvements. Compliance is a big one as well. But again, all that information in one place can show those benefits. This is just an example of the multi-site rollouts that we've seen over the years. For organizations that have been with us since X3, that we have our master accounts, consolidated accounts, and so on. But this is the typical structure of organizations that are operating multiple systems or databases, one per site across the board. And while you can have all that information roll up into one place, what it does is it creates areas in which certain teams can deviate from the overall corporate strategy, right? I spoke with an organization a little while ago. They had rolled out not our systems, but a different system where they were able to roll out successfully all of their different tools, right? And then slowly over a 5-year period, they saw new fields were created out of convenience. They saw that their translations were no longer working in certain organizations, or different approval processes were put in place kind of under the radar without a centralized governance of those systems. And while that's not, again, in many cases, mission critical or a big issue, over time, really what that does is it pokes holes in your reporting. It makes sure that at the end of the day, you're not getting consistent information and data. And that's what we're looking to fix. So just keep this in mind, is that when you think of the state of today for a lot of organizations, and even for your organization, do you look more like this, where it's different systems, different sites, or how do we get to that central focus? So today's focus for us is going to be around a strong foundation, and a strong foundation of data. So all around how your information will look when you consolidate it into one place. There's a bigger picture outside of this, which is, a centralized team and having people continuously review it. But we want to talk about the data itself and the workflows that are built into your singular maintenance software. Okay. So with this being said, I'd like to get a general idea of kind of where we're sitting with the attendees today. So Robin, if you don't mind posting the poll, I'd kind of like to talk through, what's been your organization's biggest challenge when it comes to standardizing across multiple sites? Is this something where, again, you've been trying this for years? Is it organization hasn't started yet? Just give us kind of a baseline of what we're looking at and where you're at today. So while we wait for those to come in, I will take a sip of coffee. And any questions or topics you want to cover outside of this, definitely feel free to use the chat feature. But again, these polls really help us out. as we're dealing with organizations, whether they're already standardized or on the other end too. Perfect. Robin, how much longer do we have on that?
And you should see those results now.
Excellent. So just to recap real quick, it actually looks like it's all across the board. The number one being getting alignment across teams. Secondary being actually the cleaning and consolidating of data, and then third being we haven't started yet. But overall, that's not terribly surprising. Like I mentioned, this has been a long, drawn-out process. Some organizations say, "Hey, we have standardized, but now we're having issues with the data." Some say that the data itself is hard to collect. So, not surprising across the board. But we'll cover all aspects of this when it comes down to this process. Jason, anything you think on that topic of results?
No, I think, like you said, it's exactly the representation that we kind of see in reality. Uh, Getting alignment and not starting yet tend to be two of the big buckets that we notice, and then just maintaining not only the course of direction, but the accountability from different sites as they move forward.
Awesome. All right, so this is one, Jason, I'll kind of tee you up to talk about, but an area that we run into a lot is this idea that the EAM, the CMMS, the software itself is going to be the silver bullet of, it's going to fix all of our problems. I'll let you speak to what we were chatting about the other day.
Sure. Yeah, it's a very common misconception and a bit of a myth that we'll buy the tool and the tool will solve all problems. We'd love to think that eMaint is that magic bullet and can solve all problems, but the reality is when a customer might switch from CMMS to CMMS to CMMS expecting different results, and it really has nothing to do with the feature set, there needs to be a little bit more of a root cause analysis of what's going on there. And what we tend to see is the maturity of their organization when it comes to reliability is very young and immature, and moving them towards a more mature thought process and how they're going to execute not just their CMMS rollout, but their overall maintenance strategies is key to truly getting both their internal adoption and actually producing the best ROI for their organizations. So it's beyond just which system can support us best. It really comes into how can we utilize best practices, best decision making, the best resources, and really understand how we mature as an organization with regards to reliability to get those results.
Thanks, Jason. Now, what we're going to talk through is really just 4 different key themes when it comes to common pitfalls or issues that organizations are going to run into. And it boils down to just a few things. We'll talk about strategic alignment, so the ability to, again, go back to, is the data that we have today funneling into the bigger picture of where the organization wants to be? Adoption engagement, exactly that, taking care of your people, people processes being a big piece of it. And if you're not taking care of the way that organizations want to engage or users want to engage with the system, you're not going to get the right data out of it, which then funnels into your bottom line, right? We're paying more and more because of delays in certain rollouts. We're paying more because we didn't capture a certain idea or a certain workflow, and how that impacts, again, getting the actual value, the return on investment out of the system. And then we're going to focus pretty heavily on data, right? Which is where I'll kind of hand over to Jason and let him run through the implementation side of it. So as it relates to strategic alignment or misalignment here, one area that we're not actually going to focus on too much here, but is around the rollout of the system and making sure that that is effective. Like I mentioned earlier, the level playing field with different organizations or different sites is you're going to find that there's different levels of complexity. There's different levels of, again, maturity in software use or maturity in maintenance and reliability practices. And we're hoping to overcome that. You don't want to be in the position where, a lot of sites will do this, a change management agent, someone who is actually directing this process, will select their favorite sites, one that is very advanced in their processes, and say they're going first, and then we'll get to the laggards a little later on in the rollout. And what that does is it creates a level of what I've referred to as this rollout fatigue, because what will end up happening is momentum will be great up front, but by the end, it'll fizzle out. And so we specifically with Jason and his team have the ability to really tailor these rollouts strategically and in a tailored way to organizations, whether it's more agile, more waterfall type approach to these types of rollouts. And when it comes to the actual best practices of picking a successful type of rollout, I'll actually pitch two other webinars that are great listens. One being Greg Perry outlined a number of years ago the 10 keys to a CMMS, successful CMMS rollout. And it really talks through having the team and how to gauge that maturity of different organizations along with some of the standardization processes. And actually, in a few weeks from now, Terry Akery is going to actually run through a series of slides on embodying that change agent. If you want to start this process, whether it's single site or if this is going to be a multi-site rollout, kind of best practices on setting up that rollout. So, hey, if you're looking at this, here's how to pick who goes first. Here's how to pick how to continue momentum throughout the entire project. So that way, again, you're not running into that fatigue over time. The second piece of this is around user involvement. Jason, I'll tee you up here, but there's this idea that a lot of organizations have that if we hand this to IT, if we hand this to a central group that manages our data and software today, we're going to be successful and that users are going to use the system. Jason, take it from here.
I can't wait to speak on this topic because it is something I've seen time and time again, the assumption or the assigning of IT to own the implementation of a CMMS or an EAM. And yes, they should absolutely be involved. We're dealing with security, we're dealing with data, we're dealing with single sign-on and account permissions and things like that. However, what we've found is through voice of our customers is by the time our trainers are going on site to work with the technicians and train the end user of the system, the end user is looking at us with question marks in their eyes, wondering why the system was designed for them in a particular way, why we are or aren't capturing a particular set of data, why the system isn't doing what they would need it to do. And it's not based on system functionality, it is based on configuration. The root cause of that is that the end users didn't have a voice when it came to designing the system for what needed to be done. So assuming IT ownership, I know it's a software, but it is a myth. We need to have the involvement of the plant managers, the maintenance managers, and we need to have input from the end users, mainly being the technicians, the planners, the inventory specialists, et cetera. So making sure that as you're planning your rollout and you're starting to execute and you're starting to pull together what your success criteria is and the ROI that you're looking to get out of, you need to make sure that you're involving a cross-functional team that accurately represents the organization that not only needs to receive the information that comes out of the system, but those that are going to be inputting information into it.
Right. There was an interesting story I heard a little while ago where they were talking about when it comes to involvement, it's a lot are planning for the ideal state of what a system will look like and where those benefits need to be, and that's great to have that structure up front. What ends up happening is a lot of times they discount what I would consider the problems or issues, or the other side of it being tribal knowledge or the team members who will continuously, who have been there for a long time and will actually have, workarounds, right? Ways in which they document things. The example I'm thinking of, there was a group that had a software, right? They had a CMMS that they were leveraging, but a lot of their data and information was all around, was all in their like SharePoint sites or some centralized database. And so when it came down to actually implementing, they said, great, give us your CMMS data. It wasn't there. It was over in this different system that allowed them to centralize documents and so on. So discounting tribal knowledge is going to be a big issue. And then also on top of it is overdoing it with certain features. like Jason mentioned, if you're planning this using IT and IT says, great, we're going to use work orders, requisitioning, we're going to use all of these different areas, but they're not core to the actual function of the business. Overall, they're not going to get used, and then that's wasted resources when it comes down to that full implementation phase. So let's get into system design, right? And this is Jason, this is heavily yours, so feel free to take it from here. But I do want to start out and kind of tee it up around, start with dashboards and reporting when it comes down to how you're starting to roll out these phases and processes. Because what ends up happening is if you don't have those accounted for upfront, then you don't know what you're building to. Jason, feel free to dive in.
Yeah. So ultimately, what we're looking to do in an implementation here is achieve the success factors. Those success factors are needing to be designed around the information that your organization wants to pull out. What is going to create that value, that great ROI that you're looking for? We talk about AIM. I'll bring up Greg Perry again in his different workshops. We talk about AIM, and ultimately that's beginning with the end in mind. If we know the value that we're looking to pull out, we know that the information, the metrics, and the KPIs that we need to report on, that helps us build the foundation to achieve that. We can capture all the data in the world. If we don't know what the purpose of capturing that data is or what we're needing to produce to share with our C-level execs, the maintenance planners, the site managers, et cetera, then that data may be wasted time in collecting it, and we're just collecting a whole bunch of stuff that we don't need. Conversely, if we don't establish what we need, then we may miss it. And we may have just made wrong assumptions on what we're going to collect, thinking we collected everything or thinking we collected it in the right way. So clean data, Mike said that we're going to be talking about that a lot, and he's not wrong. We're going to be getting into that, and it is absolutely critical. But understanding where we're going, the results that we're looking to drive, the KPIs that we're looking to have visibility to, that is absolutely crucial at the beginning. It gives us a target to aim for, again, starting with the end in mind, and allows us to work with you and your organization to create those standards so that we can roll out efficiently.
Now, who's accessing the system? Jason, I know your team spends a lot of time trying to pick through roles and permissions within these phases.
For sure. And this is where we start to talk about a bit of the rogue aspect. Mike, in your example, you showed how the old methodology, we would have copies of accounts, but as that time went on, your example of that customer that over 5 years, everybody started to go a little bit rogue. This is how we can start to control that. At the beginning, it starts with one of our 10 keys called core team familiarization. To me, it's also about establishing that centralized admin group. Somebody needs to eventually make a decision. Somebody needs to eventually have the ability to add a field to a form, take something away, create something or modify something that affects the entire global system. And ultimately deciding on roles, permissions, creating that centralized admin group is the best way to allow to control over that. And then it also allows for the engagement of the team, because what we're looking to do is help you curate feedback from your teams, those end level users. We don't want to necessarily do everything. Everybody's got great ideas, but it's not always great for the business or great for the CMMS. But we want to filter those ideas up. We want to gather that and then have that team to go ahead and make the decisions that are right for the entire business and the entire system. So deciding on internally what your roles, permissions, responsibilities, et cetera, are, your processes for receiving that feedback and then implementing that change are absolutely critical. That being said, the system can help us put those guardrails in place to make sure that Joe Technician isn't the one making global form changes on work orders.
Yep. And that actually kind of leads into our next piece, which is mapping out. And a lot of organizations will do a design kind of a web when it comes to workflows and business rules, who's allowed to approve what and when. And fusing this with the last slide is, a number of organizations these days are starting to create mechanisms to request change or approval or changes within the system. So whether it's changing the frequency of scheduled work, whether it's modifying a certain task or procedure, and the ability to either put that on a related table or put that into a field somewhere and have that funnel to a centralized team to make those changes is a way of to really keep tabs on what's being modified over time and navigate that change process. Jason, any additional context you want to add there?
No, well said.
Thank you. So this is where I like to get into the data more and more. And the example I'll give here was I went on a trip a couple weeks ago, went to Disney. And while I was packing the car, it was taking a long time because of the fact that what I was doing was probably not the greatest strategy in the world. Walk in, grab something from one of the rooms that I knew we needed, added it to the car, right? And then over time, what I realized is that there was no idea of how I was going to make all of this fit. I just assumed everything was going to work. The other part of it too is I had to unpack it and repack it about 2 or 3 times just to make everything work. What I realized from that is, and what resonates with me specifically around these rollouts, is it's way easier if all of your information is in one place to do an official rollout. Now, what I mean by that is not everything. We'd be foolish to say all of your business data should be within your EAM or CMMS, but everything specific to maintenance and reliability is a lot easier to consolidate and standardize if you know what you're working with. So with that being said, Jason, can you talk about some of the areas in which there may be pitfalls with data?
Sure. So when we're referring to like the completeness of data, we're definitely talking about making sure that we've established a set of data governance. We've got our data dictionary. We know what fields we're looking to capture, and we're starting to refine the options that we want selected in a particular place, right? So when we are dealing with our data import template, for example, we call out the fields that are required, and we even call out the fields that are recommended. Ultimately, we're looking to make sure that the different sites have the preparation so that they can start collecting and assimilating their data in a much more advanced stage, so that by the time their implementation comes around and they're ready for that next site, there isn't a whole lot of back and forth. They've already established what each field needs to be. They know what their collection process is and the data that they need to go grab, whether that be asset information, information on their technicians and contacts, or even MRO, inventory, supplier data, et cetera. Ultimately, this is going to increase efficiency, allows us to work with you guys to roll out more sites potentially at the same time, really allowing us to fast track those projects, because ultimately we can repeat the process. We're not having to have a bunch of back and forth going, hey, we missed this, we can't import this, we're having errors. We've already created the standards to gather that information, provide it to eMaint, and then we can, of course, get it imported into the system. The other key aspect around missing data or misaligned data is going back to that aim, that beginning with the end in mind, those KPIs, those reports. Give a quick example. Dealt with an account in the past where their work order types, let's say they had about 15 different work order types, and they were running reports based on their work order types and trying to gather what kind of efficiencies they could improve upon. What they found was that they had 5 different ways of capturing a corrective work order. They had 3 different ways of capturing their planned work or their PMs, and ultimately some things were down to misspellings or even capitalizations, et cetera. So when they revisited this, and it took some time, and time is money, of course, we refined that list with them and standardized that data. So it's not always just the completeness of do we have it or do we not have it, but it's also the data governance and controls that we set in place, and then back to the user permissions of who can, whether intentionally or unintentionally, add to those lists and potentially create those misaligned reports. So that's where Mike has gotten into our clean data, and that's really what I'm talking about here. So it's missing data as well as clean data, establishing what those global references are, those global lists, for example, asset types, work order types, job statuses, that those selections that the entire organization is going to focus on. And then we have the ability to work on, call it site specific references, or things that we want a site to have control over that is still controllable, but not global. For example, buildings, right? Your buildings or your rooms, you might want to have a small selection, but they're going to differ potentially from site to site. And so just making sure that that clean data is in there is not only going to give you actionable intel when you're talking about your real-time data, but it's going to give you the most accurate reporting on your metrics and KPIs.
Now, one area that I know we get a lot of feedback on is just around post-migration review. Now, there's a few different ways to kind of talk about this angle of it, but it's all about making sure that when the data hits a system, again, you're consolidating, you're standardizing a lot of the data coming into the system, whether it's a conversion, whether it's an import, whether it's manually put in there. The idea is that someone needs to look at it, right? And each site will know their data better than anybody else because they're working with it day to day. And so I think that this is a key step that a lot of organizations seem to kind of glance over because it feels like it's mission accomplished, right? Data is in the system. I'm looking at a record. I'm looking at a series of records. And a lot of times, especially if you're dealing with things like you're consolidating sites that have slightly different drop downs, slightly different terminology, different spellings. One that I saw the other day was there was an organization, they were consolidating a lot of different languages into one platform, which again, the drop downs, some use Z, some use S. There's all different ways in which the data can slightly adjust or be manipulated that makes it inconsistent. So this is a big piece, is getting buy-in from different sites, different departments, different parts of the organization to really commit to giving a review of the data that's in there today and finding any glaring issues up front. Because what you don't want is 2, 3, 4 years down the line from there, someone says, well, this wasn't operating right, so we didn't use it. Or the other way being, it didn't look right, so we created our own fields in order to accommodate, right? If you put in a little bit of effort up front with doing a full review of the data and information that's going through there, it's going to pay dividends on the back end of it. And one of the big pieces with Jason's implementation process that they have today is just trying to set the bones of that account up front correctly up front to avoid those types of items down the road.
And if I could throw in one comment here, post migration review, post migrating into a CMMS, there's also a level where not only you want to be reviewing those pieces, as Mike just mentioned, but setting up that committee, again, that admin group, and putting a cadence in place to start reviewing that data. Here at Fluke Reliability, we are big proponents of continuous improvement. And to think that we would set this up or you guys would set this up and then it's in stone and you would never touch it again, it's just not reality. You guys grow, your organizations grows, things are scaling, you find out over time you're capturing too much and it's not providing value, you're capturing not enough and you need to provide additional value. So going back through certain things with that group, getting feedback again from the end users and making adjustments over time is something that we strongly encourage.
So now a few tables that are commonly shared across organizations. Again, I won't go through the exhaustive list, but 2 areas in which it comes to standardization that see the highest impact are around tasks and then our inventory within the system itself. Basically, when it comes to standardization, the key is, regardless of technology that you're dealing with here, is finding out which areas are going to overlap between your organization. So whether it's a table itself, so think about tasks, your procedures, your time spent on certain activities, the requirements around parts and materials, right? These are areas which you have to really start to have that discussion up front Because if they're all in one place, if you're looking at an exhaustive list across 10, 15 different sites, that's going to be pretty big. One of the most common standardized tables or entities that you'll see across companies standardizing on a EAM is that their inventories are the most wild when it comes to the data itself. I worked with an organization where basically their part numbers, whether it's just the prefix to the part number itself or the description, they vary drastically from site to site based on the data that's being inputted today. This is an area which, when it comes to standardization, going back to it, you could see that 30% reduction in spare part inventory, because if you standardize correctly, you get a better idea of on-hand values, when they need to be reordered. You can get bulk discounts if you standardize on suppliers, right? This is an area where the numbers really hit that bottom line. And if you let this area be, again, dispersed across different locations, you're not going to realize that benefit. So Jason, anything you want to add there?
Yeah, I think there's two big proponents here. You mentioned dollars when it comes around inventory. The other piece I want to add there is dollars around downtime. So if you have a standardized inventory across a global organization, knowing that a particular part exists in another location can help with just-in-time delivery, where maybe the lead time to order from a supplier might be a month, and that's going to cost you big time in the downtime of your facility. However, if there is a site that can get it to you in half the time, and you know that because you've standardized your parts and you can very easily see that this part exists in 2 or 3 other places, then that can help you reduce downtime. It also help you reduce your overhead, because you don't necessarily need to carry as much global inventory. You can carry a smaller amount of inventory potentially and regionize it, let's say, so that 3 or 4 sites can easily share the same group of parts and be able to transfer in between, again, reducing lead time, reducing cost of inventory on hand. So there's lots of different ways that this becomes very profitable, very very high in your ROI.
Got it. Now, Jason, one thing that you mentioned, and we'll dive into this a little deeper, is around, that's more of a table-based kind of a macro type of consideration, but getting into the weeds a little bit with even down to fields. Can you kind of talk through those that organizations navigate when it comes to references and duplicates and so on?
Sure. So one, again, bringing it all back to the reporting, the KPIs, the metrics, being able to control what type of data is being entered in and restrict the options allows you to truly pull in aggregate data into those different KPIs and dashboards. For example, if we want to count how many work orders by type we have, but it was a free text field, we're not going to get the results that we're looking for. So using field types in a very intentional way. Do I want a true false value? Is this going to be a currency? Am I going to report on date and time so that I can look at differences between X time and Y time? It's critical to have that established. Basically, if you're going to report on it and it's going to be part of your metrics, then it needs to be one of these more controlled field types. Again, a true false, a reference, a foreign key with designed and intended selections, versus plain strings and free text field. Those are valuable. They're extremely valuable, but they're valuable more when you're digging into that next level, getting down to the grassroots and understanding technician comments, repair comments, things like that, versus what were the controllable, selectable, and aggregate type of information like work order type, failure codes, asset types, things like that.
Another area that I'll take is around the duplicate of fields. And a lot of this goes back to the standardization of the processes and approval workflows and everything like that. But when data is not being captured the way that certain sites or locations want it to be, that's when you can run into duplicate fields, right? Part number, part description, part name, right, can all be created out of just kind of ease. if it's not locked down, and that's when your data starts to skew from there. Um, Jason, you mentioned this is around the options themselves within references. So not just what type of data, but what can you select is a big area in which these organizations, the data itself will look different. Um, if you mash it all into one place, if you have every single option there, you may run into, emergency versus critical, right? These are areas which your reporting will not show benefits, and it's all about standardizing those before you get it into the system itself. So I want to give two other areas that are more around bottom line and maybe issues for return on investment of a standardization project. This is one that has come up a number of times, especially for some of our larger organizations that we work with, is not accounting for existing integrations. We talked about how your EAM, your CMMS may be, it's a core part of your operation, but when it comes to the business as a whole, there are all different types of softwares that are being used. So whether it's HR systems, document management systems, ERPs, and so on, this is a piece of it. And if you don't account for the transactions that are happening at the site level, that is something that again could show issues for cost, for the standardization of data, and so on. The hope would be that if you're going through this type of transformation process, that you're also standardizing on other platforms too. But this is an area which kind of will show the first sign of there's going to be additional cost for organizations if they have to either adjust integrations on their end or again switch systems. The other, which is a big piece, is over time is having a feedback loop and establishing ways in which the system can provide you whether things are improving or not. So there's two ways I talk about the feedback loop for this type of change process of standardization. One is the data. The data that's going into the reporting engine, as Jason mentioned, start to look like it's creating consistency. Is a lot of the data that's being entered today fusing correctly and again showing those improvements. And the second is more of a people related aspect, is meeting quarterly, annually, whatever you need to just get feedback on other improvements along the way. So hey, we're trying this. Hey, this is slowing us down. This is something that is working faster. So again, is that benchmarking taking place? And again, are you seeing the benefits of a consolidated system? So we within eMaint Fluke Reliability have started to talk about this concept of, well, started to, it's been around for a while, but this concept of the golden master. And Jason, can you let the people know?
Sure. Really, the golden master is what we're setting up for that global standard, right? So understanding, again, back to, let's say, the form design and the drop-down menus, how do we design the system that encompasses what the organization is truly trying to pull out of it, while also gathering the feedback from the end user and making sure that they're all designed cohesively, right? We need to make sure that it's a system that the end user is going to use, but it provides the intel that the organization needs to prove its worth ultimately. So by creating this golden master, again, we're looking to avoid the pitfalls of letting each site just start to decide and deviate from what the organization is trying to achieve, the work order process, the work order form, the data that we're capturing on assets, just to understand that this is the way that we're doing things, and we want the feedback. We want to understand if we're doing things right or wrong, but that it would get channeled through that central team to make sure that we're, again, designing for the masses, making sure that we're capturing the right information to produce the results. Ultimately, there are ways that you can successfully deviate from a single concept of a golden master, but we want to avoid the pitfalls of letting each site start to decide by themselves what they can and can't do. Usually we see it around things like divisions or production versus calibration versus facilities maintenance. And then we can design potentially additional asset types or additional work order forms, things like that, to best capture that information. But it all, again, begins at that master level, that each site isn't just going to start deciding how they want to do things, and it all gets funneled up through that admin group to make the final decision.
Yep. So when we're talking about the technology supporting these types of initiatives, this is exactly where we want to be. But going back to kind of how we've gotten here is, when it comes to people, processes, and technology and evolving the way that we need to, the playbook for success is starting up front with that planning phase, with, again, talking about standardization, who needs to be involved and when, and designing the system correctly so that, again, the people are engaged, the processes are being followed with your business rules all overlapped within it, and then the tool will assist from there. Now, when it comes to a recommendation here, I'm not going to show an example on the next slide with it, but I'll kind of talk to it. It goes back to the idea that things are easier to plan for when you have everything in one place. And so a bulk of our organizations that we've worked with that have seen success or have seen a lot of success with a very efficient rollout of a system or this tool to sites across the globe are the ones who typically will either have a guide or a survey up front to their different sites. We can provide examples outside of the webinar because it's not a one size fits all approach. But the idea being that if you send out a survey to your locations and ask the right questions, what systems are you using today? What does your data look like? Do you need it collected? Do we need translations? If your sites are in France and if your sites are in the US or if your sites are in China, for example, right? Do we need to make sure that all of that is accounted for in this change process? And then even into things like, do you want to be involved? Which is some organizations will say, no, we'll take whatever the corporate standard is. Whereas others will say, hey, we have a slightly different application than the normal. We have a lot of information here, good information that we want accounted for, which will allow for organizations to better plan for who needs to be involved and when, and what needs to be done for this change process. But typically, again, best case, worst case scenario, there are individuals, professional services that are always there to help out and kind of guide along the way. But a guide is a great way, a survey is a great way to get that information in front of everyone. So just to wrap up with the data here is not a easy process for everyone when it comes to change management. Everyone seems to be in different phases. Just going back to the survey we did earlier, the questions is organizations are all over the place, from we're fully standardized today and working on it all the way down to we have not started and have no idea where to go first. But what we want to do is give you a guide of begin with the reporting, work from there. What do we need to comply with? Is this for compliance? Are these the metrics that we want to improve by standardizing? And then back in from there of who needs to be involved, what fields and data and information need to be included as well. And then from there, just again, get all of your data into one place to be able to see if there are any outliers. Jason, any closing thoughts from your side?
No, it's really just about the planning, right? The preparation, the planning, and with that, beginning with the end in mind. If we know what we're looking to achieve, even though that we don't necessarily have the path from what we have today to where we're going tomorrow, then ultimately that's where we can come in and work with you and your organization so that we can help you avoid some of the pitfalls that we have seen and prepare you for the most efficient rollout and the best success.
All right. So from here, again, this kind of wraps up what we wanted to discuss. Robin, were there any questions that came through the chat that we can respond to?
I have one question, and your summary kind of outlined it, but it went all the way back to the poll, and it basically said a lot of good suggestions, but we're in the planning stage. There's so much to look at. If you had to tell us 1, 2, 3, the first 3 things you need to do to get people because standardization gets floated around a lot. What are the top 3 things we need to do just to get started so we don't overwhelm people?
Jason, you want to take that, or you want me to
I'll
kick
start
off?
and then I'll throw it to you. So I would say that when you're beginning and you're just starting to float around the conversation of that standardization, the first big thing that I would recommend is to understand the why. Why are we looking to standardize? What value are we looking to pull? What problems are we looking to solve? Because that's going to start to feed into what number 2 and number 3 are going to be. They're going to be a little bit different for everybody, but understanding what you're trying to accomplish, why you're trying to accomplish it will give you that path to understand what your next steps need to be. Data is always a key. Unfortunately, it's one of the bigger hangups that we see, especially as that rollout fatigue starts to set in as we start to move from site to site. Again, the first one's always eager and they've got their data ready. And then as we move forward, the data starts to, the faucet starts to turn off a little bit, we'll say. And again, number 3, just again, beginning with the end in mind, knowing what we're looking to pull out of it. I can say all day, I just want to have, good ROI, but what does that mean? Is the goal around being able to reduce overhead on inventory? Is it to be able to create better KPI and reporting so that we can make better data-driven decisions? Again, beginning with the end in mind, designing what those metrics are. So why, data, metrics.
That's exactly what I was about to say. Overall, it's look what you're looking to improve. Second is take a baseline of what the current state looks like, and then assemble the team. And then from there, it kind of builds itself. The idea being that if you start with what you're looking to improve, again, standardization could be obviously the key, could not, but at least then you'll know, hey, here's where the ship's heading, and how we need to get there. Any others come through, Robin?
Nope, that was my only question.
All right. So then in a final note, again, we definitely appreciate the time when it comes to this. Jason has done this hundreds and hundreds of times himself. I'm sure thousands across his entire team and so on. But we definitely appreciate it. Hopefully, we brought some value when it comes to uncovering some blind spots or considerations when it comes to standardization. And we look forward to continuing those conversations down the road.
Thank you. And thank you, gentlemen, again for sharing your insight and expertise today. And to you, our audience, thanks for joining today.